So this is my review of the Box Nation BT Sports Frank Warren show tonight. I have covered the Eddie Hearn show featuring Martin Murray, Rosado and Rocky Fielding in a separate video which is already up on the channel, so please feel free to check that out if you're of interest. But on this video we'll just be discussing the Bill broadcast on Box Nation. So we'll start with the main event. Actually, before we do that, let's say on the whole, I thought this was a really good night of boxing on Box Nation. You know, really good. Had a bit of everything. Had some real interesting prospects on the way up. Guys like Anthony Yarde, guys like Daniel Dubois, you know, real blue chip prospects. It had a guy who, in terms of pure talent, I appreciate his resume isn't there yet, but in terms of pure talent is, in my opinion, one of the best fighters in the world in Tete. It had, you know, a close British title trade fight with Tyrone Nurse versus Hughes. You know, and then the main event, Tommy Langford versus Khurtsidze, actually turned into be quite a good fight and quite a good stylistic matchup. Now, I've never rated Tommy Langford. All the way on his way up, I've been one of his detractors, if I'm honest. I thought the guy was very limited. I thought he was very stiff, no head movement, no defence, very upright. I thought he was real plodding. And I did comment on Twitter tonight that I think it's bizarre who a fighter who I would say is barely British level is fighting for an interim world title. And I expected him to lose. I hadn't seen much of Khurtsidze. But from what I had seen, he was a useful operator. But Langford actually was probably ahead in the fight at the time of the stoppage. This Khurtsidze, if you haven't seen him fight before, he's worth checking out. The height difference between Langford and Khurtsidze was remarkable. I think it was a 9-inch height difference between the two of them. Khurtsidze is the smallest middleweight you will ever see. But he's built like a bull. You know, he's very thickly set. He's very powerful. He's very muscular. And not only is he extremely small in stature to begin with, being only 5'4", but he actually fights incredibly low. You know, he bobs and weaves and bends. And that was the complete antithesis of Langford, who's so tall and upright and square on and, you know, limited head movement. So the fight started with Langford looking to box and move. He looked to use his legs, use his jab, and keep the smaller man at range. He was using a hell of a lot of energy to do that. And Khurtsidze was bringing a lot of pressure. He was a bit wild, quite raw, quite scrappy, but aggressively come forward. And Langford was expending a lot of energy. The fight followed that real pattern, with Langford looking to be the outside boxer using his jab, and Khurtsidze looking to be the inside brawler, the mid-range hooker, coming forward wildly. I think it's the 5th round where Khurtsidze throws a wild looping overhand tight wide left hook, and he just catches Langford, as Jim Watt would say, bang on the chin. You know, Langford's head is up, his hands are low, he's thrown a lazy 1-2 and hasn't brought his hands back quickly, and his chin is just up in the air, no head movement, stiff as a pillar, and Khurtsidzes' long, wide hook just catches him straight on the chin, and he's put down. Khurtsidzes' conduct during the knockdown wasn't ideal. The referee sent him to the corner. I don't think the referee realised he did this, but Khurtsidze appeared to approach Langford whilst he was down behind the referee in the referee's blind spot and taunt Tommy Langford, you know, doing the referee's count, miming the referee's count. Now Langford gets up to his feet and the referee initially looks like he's going to wave the fight on. And he asks Langford to look at him and walk forward. And I was wondering if Langford was actually looking at Khurtsidze, because unbeknownst to the referee, Khurtsidze is 6 inches behind the referee. And Khurtsidze is miming and joking and dancing. And I wasn't sure if Langford was actually looking at him. And that's why the referee thought he was all over the place. Having said that, I don't actually believe it would have made a difference, because I think at that point Langford had been hurt badly I think he barely made the count. And I think if the referee had waved it on, Khurtsidze would have probably found him again and stopped him. But I didn't like that from Khurtsidze. Khurtsidze himself, essentially, you never like to describe a punch in boxing as a lucky punch, because if a top level boxer throws a punch and it lands, you can assume that was their intention. But it was a wild, sloppy, loopy hook that he threw. It was like a Hail Mary punch, and it landed. Prior to that, I do think he was getting outboxed. I do think he was starting to tire. He missed weight first time round by 9 ounces or so. The commentary team was saying he was very, very tight at the weight. Maybe the effects of that were starting to show, and he was getting tired. He's 37 or 38 years old, something like that. So the combination of that age, the combination of being tight at the weight, maybe it was the style. I did think Khurtsidze was starting to slow. And I did think he was probably marginally behind in the fight. But he clipped Langford. And Khurtsidze is a dangerous guy because he's very awkward. He's ludicrously unpredictable. And I can imagine it's very, very hard to get sparring that would even come close to mimicking the style that Khurtsidze offered in there tonight. Tommy Langford, the fight came too soon for him, really. I understand why they took the opportunity. He was in a fight versus Craig Cunningham, and I think Craig Cunningham would have beaten him for what it's worth. So, given that was such a risky fight for a British title, why not take a fight that's equally as risky at a much higher level? I understand the Billy Joe Saunders situation meant that the fight became available, so I understand why they took it, but I do think it was too early for Langford. I don't really think Langford had been in with any level of opposition whatsoever to justify his ranking so high in the world. And I think his lack of experience showed in there at times tonight. Having said that, I actually thought Langford did certain things in there tonight better than I've seen in some of his previous fights. And potentially he can come again. He can rebuild. He's a very big guy at the weight. Maybe at some point he'll make it into super middleweight. But I do think he can come back. And certainly middleweight, super middleweight, there is an extremely live domestic scene that he can go right into the mix with. Maybe that Craig Cunningham fight's still there. Maybe John Ryder. Maybe Rocky Fielding. Maybe Adam Etches. There's so many names you could throw into that mix domestically. But I do think there are definitely fights out there for him. Maybe Spike O'Sullivan, maybe Anthony Ogogo, maybe Jamie Cox. There's a lot of domestic level names in that merry-go-round at 160 and 168, and Langford can definitely be in that mix. He did certain things well in there tonight, but he got clipped. He was too upright, too defensively open, and it was too much too soon for him tonight. Billy Joe Saunders was quite critical ringside. He was quite critical of Tommy Langford, and he was also quite typical of Khurtsidze. Billy Joe Saunders made it clear that in his opinion he viewed Khurtsidze as extremely sloppy. He kind of gave the impression that when he fights Khurtsidze, and by the way, Frank Warren said that that fight is all but confirmed for early July. So about 10 weeks away in London. Billy Joe says when he fights Khurtsidze, when Khurtsidze is so wide and so sloppy, Billy Joe Saunders will make him miss and make him pay. And do you know what? Stylistically, if Khurtsidze was to fight an informed Billy Joe Saunders may make him look silly in there. Because Tommy Langford was there to be hit. He was so tall, he was so upright, there was no head movement, no defence. Billy Joe Saunders is a very evasive target. He's slippery, he's slick, he's a southpaw, he bobs, he weaves, he ducks, he bends. He's got excellent head movement, excellent upper body movement, world-class footwork. He's fast. Billy Joe Saunders is a very slippery, difficult target to catch clean. And he also counterpunches and times really, really well. And I do suspect that Billy Joe Saunders could make a guy like Khurtsidze actually look silly in there. Because whilst Khurtsidze is unorthodox and difficult, he is essentially a guy who throws looping hooks from long range wildly and without any technical construction. And Billy Joe's the sort of guy who will just bob under it, anticipate it, his reflexes will carry him through, he'll bend, create an angle and counterpunch. And he'll counterpunch accurately and eye-catchingly. I understand, and I've seen footage of it on Facebook, there appears to have been quite an ugly confrontation at the press conference post-fight between Billy Joe Saunders and Khurtsidze. Billy Joe Saunders, he could perhaps benefit from some of the Matchroom Anthony Joshua media training. To be honest, Billy Joe Saunders and Tyson Fury have historically been my two favourite fighters, but the similarities between them are actually troubling, because we've seen the way Tyson Fury's career has gone in the last year or two, and looking at Billy Joe Saunders, you've got to suggest that there's some possibility Billy Joe Saunders' career could go exactly the same. Billy Joe Saunders approached Khurtsidze. He told him that he had a big nose. He told him that he should go back to Georgia, and Billy Joe Saunders proceeded to lift his top, rub his belly, and tell him that the fat man is going to beat him. Now, the difference between Billy Joe Saunders and Tyson Fury, there are numerous differences, but a key difference is that when Billy Joe Saunders does take on Khurtsidze in 10 weeks, unlike Tyson Fury, when he fights, Billy Joe is going to have to make weight. And he's going to have to make weight at middleweight, 11 stone 6, or he's going to lose his title. Now, Billy Joe Saunders, as a middleweight, probably steps into the ring 12 stone 2, something of that nature. He makes weight at 11 stone 6. He probably puts on half a stone, maybe a bit more, between weigh-in and fight night. Based on the physique Billy Joe Saunders has in ring at 12 stone, and based on what I saw tonight, I believe Billy Joe Saunders is no less than 14 stone. And if you told me that he was 15 stone or 15 and a half stone, I'd believe you. He looked atrocious. He looked in disgusting physical condition. Particularly worrying, considering this is a man who was legitimately suggesting he would be taking on Gennady Golovkin in 2 or 3 months' time. This is a guy who isn't taking his career seriously. This is a guy who has not learnt from his mistakes. This is a guy who fades in every fight he has. He comes out, he wins the first couple of rounds looking dominant. He fades and fades and fades and fades. Yet he's blowing up to these ridiculous weights. I think Billy Joe Saunders is a heavyweight at the minute. You know, the damage that it's doing to his body is evident for all to see. And he's getting away with it because he's young and he's talented. But this training camp he's about to go into for Khurtsidze, before he can focus on any boxing or anything like that, he's got to focus on losing 3 stone of pure lard. And being that fat, being that heavy, is going to severely impinge on the effectiveness of his training in those early weeks, because he is in bad physical condition, Billy Joe. Bad. And it's going to be hard for him to cut down. You know, I do think he's got the beating of Khurtsidze. I think he's got the boxing class. But he's not learning from his mistakes. He keeps blowing up. And it's really, really not good. Really not good. But Billy Joe Khurtsidze, yeah. We'll see that fight July, and that's one, of course, we'll cover again on this channel. Let's talk about the undercard. Tyrone Nurse drew with Joe Hughes. Disappointing performance from Tyrone Nurse. I didn't score the fight because I was flicking between Box Nation and Sky. But my instinct was Tyrone Nurse just about did enough to win. Realistically, whilst I think the general public consensus is he did enough to win, he probably has got no one but himself to blame for this draw. He was poor in there. Maybe inactivity told, Maybe he was lacking a bit of momentum. But we've seen this from Tyrone Nurse time and time again. You know, he's got certain attributes that look European level, maybe even world level. But he's sloppy. He gives away rounds. Irish Tom put on Twitter, and I think he nailed it. Tyrone Nurse schools people when he boxes from range in the centre of the ring. But too often he gets involved where he likes to fight on the inside. And he likes to sit with his back on the ropes, fight up close and trade punches. And it doesn't work for him. You know, he drops rounds time and time again to subpar opposition. And tonight it really cost him. It really cost him. And even if you think Tyrone Nurse did enough to win tonight, you'd have to agree that Joe Hughes, took multiple rounds off Tyrone Nurse. You know, multiple rounds off Tyrone Nurse. Tyrone Nurse shouldn't be losing multiple rounds to a guy like Joe Hughes. He really shouldn't. It's a big setback for Tyrone Nurse, this. A real big setback for him. You know, very live domestic division right now. Jack Catterall, Josh Taylor, Ahara Davies. He's behind all of those guys after tonight. You know, there are schools of thought about what best to do with him. I saw Mikey, who's a regular listener, put on Twitter, maybe to motivate him, he needs to be thrown straight in at a higher level, Euro level. And do you know what? I don't think that's a bad suggestion. I don't think these British level fights for Tyrone Nurse are doing him any good. You know, he's coasting, he's labouring, he's not looking good, he's not building a brand for himself, he's frustrating people, he's frustrating his fans, and he's labouring to draws, labouring to close wins. You know, maybe it's time for Tyrone Nurse to sink or swim. Put him in a European title fight. If he loses, maybe it's time to accept that he's not as good as sometimes he looks. Maybe it's time to accept that whilst he has got class attributes as an all-round fighter, he just isn't totally there at top level. Or maybe he'll flourish at the Euro level. But there's only one way to find out. But I don't want to see him in another English-British level title fight. We've seen too many of those now, and the results have been continually uninspiring. Daniel Dubois, highly regarded heavyweight prospect, moves to 2-0 by second round knockout. I posted a separate video on Dubois' fight, post-fight reaction, only 3 or 4 minutes long. It's up on the channel if you want to check it out. In short, Dubois, a very big guy. He's hitting very hard already. He's got an excellent jab, and he clearly has power. I really wouldn't rush this guy. He's still a bit raw. He's still a bit green. He got clipped very heavily at one point in this fight. I don't think he was hurt. I think he was just caught off balance. But he got clipped very heavily. This is the heavyweight boxing division. One wrong punch and you could have a David Price situation on your hands. I like Dubois. I think he's a real potential prospect. But as big as he is, at 19 years old, he probably needs time to physically mature and grow into himself. And I'd like to see him in against a succession of well-known journeymen who are known for giving people rounds, who are durable, who will give him experience and take him 6-round distances, you know. I think if he had 3 or 4 of those in 2017, it would stand him in very, very good stead. But he needs to tighten up. He needs to be disciplined defensively, and he needs to, you know, commit to that jab. So he looked good from range behind that jab tonight. Not so good up close. Few rough edges that could be ironed out for me there, but an impressive blue chip prospect. And you know, I just think Frank needs to take time with him and not rush. You know, a lot of people say who wins, Dubois or Fury? Who wins, Dubois or Joshua? You know, for me, he's nowhere near that level yet. But nor should he be. He's 19. He's 2-0. Take the time with him. He can come good. He looks like he's got a lot of attributes. There's just no need to rush him. Fight of the year contender on the bill tonight. Real great fight between Jermaine Smile and Daryl Williams. I have it on good authority. Daryl Williams was quite ill in the lead up to this fight. And, you know, potentially could have been a bit better than the performance suggested given his health problems on the lead up to the fight. I don't have that confirmed, but I've heard it from a source that I trust. Williams really took on the approach of being a come-forward fighter. Small guy at the weight, very, very small guy at the weight. He's now English super middleweight champion, having beaten Jermaine Smile here. But he's very small, and he was getting caught a lot. He really was taking punches to land punches, and it took it out of him being the smaller man in there, eating a lot of leather from a guy like Jermaine Smile. I think if Darryl Williams was able to cut down to middleweight, the style he had would be more effective. I think he'd be able to impose himself on naturally smaller guys. And I think that trying to do what he did against a bigger guy at 168 pounds meant that it was harder work for him. He definitely deserved to win. I had it 6 rounds to 4 in Williams' favour. Few people thought Smile won. I didn't think Smile did enough. I thought Williams was outworking him. But yeah, Williams, for me, he probably doesn't have the size to step into the mix at 168 pounds at British level. You know, you're talking about guys who are like Rocky Fielding at that sort of level. Guys who are 6'3". And for me, he's too small to mix it at British level with those guys. So I think an English title win at the minute is probably the extent of his capability. I'd like to see him cut down to 160, and maybe he can go on to bigger and better things at that weight. Real great fight though. You know, even if you haven't heard of both guys, Jermaine Smile versus Darryl Williams, check that fight out. All action, complete brawl, blood and guts. For me, this fight and the Boy Jones Jr. Craig Poxton fight are the 2 contenders at the minute for Fight of the Year. Both Box Nation lower level title fights. Real good stuff. Interested to know how people scored that fight, so do leave your scorecards in the section below. Anthony Yarde looked very good, blowing out a journeyman in 1 round. Very smart boxing performance, and clearly very handed from Anthony Yarde. He steps up to Southern Area title level in his next fight, which will be an interesting step up, but you know, looking at him, he looks well above Southern Area title already. So without knowing too much about his opponent, confident that he wins, and hopefully does so in decent style. Zolani Tete won a 12-round fight against Villanova. Probably butchered that name. Tete looked extraordinarily competent in there. You know, truly a world-class operator. One for the purists, and I believe that was for the WBO interim. So we'll see what Frank Warren does for him now. But I like seeing Tete on these builds. You know, for me, it's a real boost to a hardcore fan to see a guy like him with his skill set. You know, I know he doesn't have the resume to be considered a top pound-for-pound guy, but I think in terms of skill set, he's right there. And I must admit, if he fought Rigondo tomorrow, I'd pick him over Rigondo. I think a guy like Tete with his volume, you know, I think he'd have cause technical problems and volume problems for Rigondo. I think, for me, the one criticism I have of Tete is he didn't really go through the gears as much as I would like. You know, I thought he was doing some good work early on in the fight on the inside and, you know, really piling on the pressure against Villanova. And I'd have liked to see more of that in the late end rounds. I think he's going to need to do more of that if he wants to continue to grow his fan base over here. Because, you know, at the minute he's kind of flying under the radar. But, you know, it'd be fascinating to see what Frank does with him. And hopefully he's kept busy, he's kept active, and we see him in a meaningful fight. Because, you know, this guy is super good to watch. And some of the punches he puts together, some of the head movement, the upper body movement, the evasion of punches, it's like watching something from the Matrix. It's a joy to behold, it really is. Lastly, Leon Woodstock. Big fan of Leon Woodstock. Been to a few of his fights. Really does remind me of a Chris Eubank Jr., the way he's coming up. He had a tough fight tonight. He won in 3 rounds by stoppage against Paul Holt, who put in a very good performance. This was for the Midlands area super featherweight title. And although it was only 3 rounds, it was 3 rounds of great action. Paul Holt came out very strong in the first round and really stuck it on Woodstock. Put Woodstock in the corner and landed several barrages of punches. Woodstock, for me, I had him potentially in trouble in that first round. Holt definitely won the first round in taking style. Second round was an absolute war. You know, that round could have gone either way. But Woodstock was the bigger puncher of the two. Woodstock, even though he was under pressure and under fire from Holt, he actually covered up quite nicely in the corner and took a lot of the work on his gloves. And he counter-punched really well. You know, he'd wait to see an opening when Holt was slugging, and he'd catch him with a nice big hook. And several times, Holt's head was snapped back hard. And then Woodstock, you know, on his front foot, he is like a Chris Eubank Jr. You know, he had Holt up against the ropes. He'd go left, low to the body, throw something up the middle, you know, fast hands, combinations, barrages of punches. And he's clearly got some snap to his work. And the referee was right to wave it off. Holt wasn't getting dropped, but his head was getting snapped back all over the place, and he was hurt. So, you know, Woodstock's an interesting prospect. He's only 23. He's now 9-0. This fight showed that, you know, potentially he's still got some stuff to work on, and potentially, technically, you know, there's still substantial areas for improvement with him. This division is actually relatively stacked in terms of the domestic scene. Liam Walsh, Stephen Smith, Martin Ward, Andy Townend, George Jupp, Ronnie Clark, Zelfa Barrett, Maxie Hughes, Sam Bowen, Craig Poxton, who just beat Boy Jones Jr., of course, actually you forget, Archie Sopp. You know, there's big names in this division domestically. So Leon Woodstock can go right into that mix. But as I say, he's 9-0, 23 years old, showed a bit of stuff to work on there tonight. So no need to rush him. You know, like Daniel Dubois, take your time with him. But he's Midlands area champion, and I do believe he can go on to win a British title at least. And he's a very entertaining fighter. He's extremely charismatic inside and outside the ring. And he puts punches together like a little Chris Eubank Jr. Very, very eye-catching fighter to watch. So, you know, if his profile's built correctly, he can be a star of the future. And he can be a big name, certainly. I'm trying to think if I've missed anyone out now. I'm trying to think if I've covered all the fights on the bill. I'm just having a think. We've discussed Daniel Dubois. We've discussed Tyrone Nurse. Discussed the main event. Just trying to think if we've missed anyone out. But no, I think that's all the names that I wanted to cover from tonight's bill. Just a quick word on the Box Nation coverage. You know, Paul Dempsey is entertaining. I've got to say, credit to Box Nation, because they did a piece on Joshua Klitschko tonight, and I've got to give them credit for that. You know, Box Nation is a pure, you know, boxing channel, and Klitschko Joshua is the biggest fight of the year, and credit to them for giving it coverage and discussing it, despite the fact it's not on their channel. I doubt Sky would have given them the same courtesy if it's a big fight, you know, with the opposition. So, respect for that. But Paul Dempsey, you know, there's people, you know, there's people on Sky, and you think they're just pure company men, and you think, oh, you know, these guys are so biased. All they do is talk up the Sky fighters and that sort of thing. Paul Dempsey is the complete opposite. You know, when he was talking about Fight of the Year contenders, during the Smile Williams fight, he didn't mention Boy Jones Jr. versus Poxton. He mentioned Burton Buglioni. He then went on to say that the title Tommy Langford was fighting for, the interim title, was a bit of a joke. He said, all our experts here, that's you blokes, to the panel of, you know, Steve Bunce. He was really like Steve Bunce and Barry Jones. He went, all our experts, you guys. He then went on to call Ronald McIntosh Ronald McDonald. You know, Paul Dempsey was on fire tonight. Sometimes I watch him, and he's so difficult, and he's so awkward, and he's so critical, you know, calling the main event for a joke title. You wonder if he's kind of just doing it as a troll. You wonder if he's just having a bit of banter. If he's trying to, you know, make his mates laugh at home. But I don't know. It's certainly entertaining to watch. I don't know how long it'll last with some of those sort of comments. Ronald McIntosh I find really painful. I've said it before on the channel. I just find him, you know, needless in terms of some of the stuff he says. Some of the descriptions are so out there and needless. I actually find it detracts from the action. But yeah, all in all, I thought the coverage, the presentation was good. I thought Dempsey was entertaining. And it was a really good night of boxing. It had something for everyone. Much better than the Sky Bill for me tonight. The fights were better. The fighters were more entertaining. And I've got to say, you know, Frank Warren's prospects, they don't have the same hype. They don't have the same public awareness about them. You know, People out there don't know who Leon Woodstock is. You know, people out there probably don't even know who like Anthony Yarde is or Zelfa Barrett is. But if you go through Frank Warren's list of fighters, and if you say, how many of these have the capability to win a British? How many of these have the capability to win a Euro? How many of these have the capability to win a World Championship? It's actually staggering the strength in depth he has and the talent in his stable. He's got some real good up and coming fighters. He's got names like Zolani, Tete who are already there, and you know, he just seems to have a knack of putting fights together that catch fire even at Southern Area English title level. Jermaine Spile versus Darryl Williams, by far the best fight on TV tonight, stole the show. Let me know your thoughts, guys. Let me know your thoughts on everything discussed, be it Billy Joe Saunders, Khurtsidze, Langford, Tyrone Nurse, Daniel Dubois. Drop your comments in the section below. I've rambled on here for 30 minutes, so you know, if you've enjoyed the video, appreciate you sticking with me for 30 minutes. Take the time to hit the thumbs up button, and please subscribe. Last thing I'll say, the one thing I didn't get was the Anthony Yarde Nigel Benn comparison. I just didn't get it. You know, apart from anything else, stylistically, they're complete opposite. I don't see any similarities at all. I don't know what they were doing with that. I also don't know what they're doing with this Triple D Daniel Dubois thing. That is cringeworthy. So 2 small gripes there at the end. But apart from that, great night of boxing. Credit to Box Nation. Credit to BT Sports. Credit to Frank Warren. Credit to all the prospects. Huge credit to Darryl Williams and Jermaine Spile. Excellent fights. Really enjoyed it. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Leave your comments, hit the thumbs up, and please subscribe.